Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we are going to continue our exploration of Mars's upcoming conjunction with Neptune in the sign of Pisces. We're going to talk today about how the Mars-Neptune conjunction can be looked at from the standpoint of the kinds of spiritual lessons the soul is learning as it navigates this lifetime and as it has likely navigated many lifetimes previously and maybe more to come. And so from that standpoint of looking at the eternal soul, what opportunities for spiritual learning and growth does a Mars-Neptune combination provide us with? So that's going to be our agenda for today. Before we get into it, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your comments and reflections in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you guys. If you have a good story, always use the hashtag grabbed or email us your story, grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. You can find a transcript of today's talk on the website, which is also nightlightastrology.com. Got a few promos today to go over with you guys. I'm going to take you over to the website. And of course, I want to point you guys to the upcoming events. Go to the live talk and speaker series to see which live events are coming up at Nightlight. These are live webinars that we host. You can see that in May on the 16th, I'm doing a sneak preview of Neptune into Aries and what we can expect from that archetypal combination. And then in June, I'm doing a talk on the 12th house. This will be really good for looking at the healing potential contained within the 12th house of your birth chart. And then we're going to be talking about Uranus and Gemini as another sneak preview of an outer planetary movement that's coming up. The other thing I want to promote are the upcoming courses. First year, second year, and horary begin in June. I will be doing a little bit of more of a specific promo for horary in the weeks to come. Year one class begins June 16th. We meet live for webinars, 30 on the year. It's a first year course immersion into ancient Hellenistic astrology. We, of course, include the archetypal psychological perspective in everything I do. It's kind of a fusion or a synthesis. We have an interactive group forum discussion and breakout study sessions led by tutoring staff. So there's a ton of support built into this program for you to connect with, create community with. And at the bottom of the page, you will find the different enrollment options. The early bird payment and early bird installment plans save you quite a bit of money, and they last until May 15th. So you have a little bit more time to take advantage of those. Tuition assistance is also available. So if you're someone who'd like to take the course, but you need a little bit of help because you're in a difficult spot financially, we understand it's not easy. And so we make that available for people so that nobody's priced out. We really believe in making sure that this kind of class and material is accessible for everybody coming from all different backgrounds. So use that because we're happy to offer it for people who might need help. If you can afford the regular prices with the payment plans, early bird options, we ask that you do that. Stick around at the end. You'll hear me after I sign off today. There's a video that I've tagged onto the end where I talk more about the program in depth so you can learn more about it. Anyway, I hope to study with some of you guys soon. We have more and more people enrolling all the time. Really excited for a new cohort. It's a very good time to begin studying astrology with Jupiter and Uranus coming together. Like that's a great signature to commit to taking the dive into astrology under, as well as Pluto and Aquarius coming around right now. Anyway, so today what we're going to do is take another look at Mars and Neptune. We want to talk about Mars and Neptune on the soul level. What I mean by that when I say the soul level is really just how can we understand the various lessons that might come with this archetypal combination, thinking of the soul as a learning, growing, evolving being from lifetime to lifetime. We're slowly growing, wings, and our consciousness is always changing, of course. I don't like to think of our consciousness changing in terms of levels and accomplishments and hierarchies and things like that. But I do notice in my own life, and I notice in the lives of so many people that I work with, that it's just a kind of spiritual fact of life that we grow and that we become more illumined in time through the ups and downs and through the work that we put in spiritually. And I know so many of you out there are doing that work too, that work of growth. It's not easy. And it's not that life is all about work either, right? It's also, in some ways, the hardest thing to do is to let go of the idea that we are not somewhere we need to be and just abide in life. But for many of us, that still constitutes an important spiritual milestone, right? So there's so many different ways in which we can grow. Anyhow, Mars-Neptune on the soul level. Let's review the basic features of the transit first. So here we can see quite clearly Mars and Neptune are coming together in late Pisces. And we're going to see, this is Thursday today that let me go back. So we're on Thursday, April 25th. Roll it forward, and now Two planets are coming together Sunday, April 28th into Monday, April 29th. And then Mars shoots into the sign of Aries by Tuesday, April 30th. So their conjunction is in front of us. We talked about it yesterday. We're talking about it again today. This will be something you will most likely feel and notice anytime between now and the course of the weekend. But it's something that's also been building. Mars and Neptune have been co-present for a long time now. And there are some really important things that we can say. And I wrote down some notes that I wanted to make sure I touched on today. And so I'm going to bring them up one at a time. These aren't in any order of importance. They're just 3 notes about Mars-Neptune and what these contacts tend to bring up, or what kinds of lessons they tend to bring with as the soul is learning and growing, and happens across this combination. Like, let's say Neptune is transiting your natal Mars in your birth chart, or in the case of something like this, Mars Neptune coming together in the sky, and maybe it's landing in a prominent place in your chart or aspecting another planet in your chart. And even if not, you could still notice these things coming up, maybe not as loudly as if they're hitting something in your chart in a big way, but nonetheless. So the first one is inner strength. And I'm going to call on the lessons of a couple of hexagrams. These are hexagrams that have come to mind this week as I've been writing about, thinking, and reflecting on these combinations. So hexagram 60 is sometimes it's called regulations, sometimes it's called limitations, sometimes it is called restraining, sometimes it is called containment. There are restrictive regulations is another way of putting it that sometimes comes up. So let me just do one thing here. There we go. And so you have a variety of different ways that hexagram 60 is referred to, most of it which has to do with something like discipline, regulations, restrictions, structures that contain things like that. One thing that's really interesting about Mars-Neptune combinations is that they tend to coincide with the development of strength. However, this is not a strength that, like Mars-Saturn that we had in Pisces earlier this year. I think it was at this point, I think it was the early part of April, right after the eclipse. That Mars-Saturn has to do with strength and the setting or establishing of boundaries and limitations. But there's a really interesting teaching that comes with hexagram 60 when it speaks to the cultivation of strength. So it is a hexagram that talks about the need for anything to grow. You have to have some parameters around it. For example, like you think about the container of a plant. It needs a container. If the container is too strict, and if the container is too constricting, right, the plant won't be happy. And then eventually, as the plant grows, it needs a different container. So one of the lessons that comes with hexagram 60 is about knowing what kinds of rules, structures, disciplines, and boundaries, or what kinds of structures to put in place so that something can become strong, but also so that the regulations or structures don't become constricting and kill the development of what's on the inside. There's this really interesting dynamic with Mars and Neptune where if Mars and Neptune are anything, they represent something like the beautiful and sort of unstructured expression of power or strength or will. It's like fluid and boundaryless with Mars-Neptune. However, the highest expression of that kind of power is almost never cultivated without some form of discipline or structure, right? So think, for example, yesterday, my daughter had a graduation for her next karate belt. She's 5. It was a big deal, And we were there and we were watching these older boys test for their black belts. And I mean, it was like one test of a number, I guess, that they had to do or something. And those boys were like just so fluid in the moves that they were making. And I mean, it was beautiful to behold, sincerely. And I just thought to myself, okay, for them to look that fluid and powerful and easy, an enormous amount of discipline, an enormous amount of practice went into it. And so there's a weird way in which the things that look the most fluid, the most natural, have been born from the right amount and the right kinds of discipline at the right times. Think about music. Think about the great, jazz players or the great improvisational guitar players or whatever. How much discipline and practice goes into ending up doing something and making it look so effortless. The same thing is true with astrology. I can sit down now with people and maybe have looked at their chart for 30 seconds, right? And I can perform a pretty solid reading. I don't mean to toot my own horn. It's just, when you've done it for 14 years and you've seen 13,000 charts of all different kinds, horary, so many different kinds of charts over such a long period of time, you can do things very, very fluidly and make hard things look very easy and simple. And a lot of the students, coming through the program, when they see chart demos and stuff like that, they'll say, you make it look so easy. And I'm like, actually, it was never like that up until you just had a certain amount of time and experience and practice. And you just keep practicing and, having some structures in your life. And then all of a sudden it looks effortless. So hexagram 60 and this idea of inner strength is really fascinating because Mars-Neptune is about like, how can I be effortlessly strong? How can I be effortlessly powerful? How can I be fluid and get things done? How can I get things done with flow, in a strong, powerful way? I exercise my will and things just get done. And I don't mean that in a maniacal way. I just mean like, how can we be effective and fluid? I mean, everyone wants that in a sense, it's like you just want to flow through life getting shit done and like having fun and feeling like strong and wonderful as you go. You want to be effective. But that comes from so much chopping of wood and carrying of water. Now, okay, so that's a basic truth, right? That's hexagram 60. Mars-Neptune can have a hard time with that in two different ways. One, you can think to yourself, well, I'm all intuition. I don't need any discipline. I don't need any practice. I don't need any tradition. I don't need to rely on any external authority, teachers, approaches, methods, techniques, tried and true practices that have come before me that can teach me how to get to that effortless place. No, I don't need it because I'm already a Jedi. You know what I mean? And so Mars-Neptune can be about the arrogance of thinking that, you're just God, and your will is somehow divinely aligned, and there's no discipline or practice or cultivation. And so that can be one thing that Mars-Neptune struggles with. On the other hand, and I think this is probably far more common, at least what I see in people that I work with, and this is the other thing. You can also become too restrictive. And you can end up emphasizing the restrictions more than the thing that you're cultivating on the inside. So let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, that you need to set a boundary with another human being, okay? And you need to set that boundary in terms of what kinds of interactions you need to have or how much time you spend or there's parameters, and you get clear about the fact that you need some boundaries with a certain person. It doesn't have to be someone you hate or anything. It's just like, okay, there's certain boundaries I need with this person. You set those boundaries, and you're doing so really with the intention from the standpoint of hexagram 60 and from the standpoint of like a Mars-Neptune lesson, so that internally you have honored your intuition, you have honored where your actual strength is at, right? If I don't set certain boundaries, then I get drained by this person, or I lack discernment, or on my own, I am not strong enough to be in this relationship in the way that is most conducive to my health or happiness. And so I have to set some boundaries. But the setting of those boundaries is meant to help developing that inner strength, right? And eventually you want that inner strength to be strong enough so that in maybe other relationships in the future, you can operate without having to rely so intensely on various artificial boundaries that you put up, rules and so forth. Because here's the thing, if let's say let's say in the situation where you have to set up some rules and boundaries with someone, well, that gives you the space to cultivate something that you're lacking, right? But if you then make the mistake of thinking that the boundary is the answer, then what happens when there's a difficult situation that arises with that person where your boundary has to be compromised? You could become too black or white about it. Let's say that you have to call that person up, and generally speaking, you prefer to talk to them in person. You're like, once I get them on the phone, they talk to me for 2 hours. And so I only like to meet them in person. That's my boundary. I can't get into phone calls with this person. Okay, but maybe there's an emergency or very particular circumstance that arises, and all of a sudden you go, yeah, well, I don't talk to them as a rule on the phone, and so I can't do that. Sorry. That would be an example of what hexagram 60 says is an engagement in restrictions that have become too hard. And so you're not actually helping the thing inside. The strength you're actually trying to cultivate is not going to be cultivated if the boundaries that you have in place to help facilitate the development of that strength are so rigid that they don't allow for certain flexibilities or exceptions, like you have to break rules here or there. And so in other words, you might need to call that person and be like, you know what, I'm going to call them. There's something very specific, and then after 25 minutes, you have to put yourself to the test and say, I have to get off the phone. Right? I mean, how would you ever learn how to develop the strength to do something difficult if at some point, rather than totally relying on rules and boundaries, you're put into a situation where you have to be put to the test? I'm going to give you another example. So this is something that comes from someone I know who has been in a 12-step program for like decades, right? There came a time where they had to allow themselves. At first, it was like, I can't be with alcohol, near alcohol. I can't be around people who are drinking. And it was very restrictive. And they had to do that, right? As an addict, they had to say, okay, like I am cultivating this inner strength. And for now, the only way I can cultivate it is by setting these boundaries. But then you get into a situation where at some point, the testing of that strength needs those boundaries to be a little bit fluid, because otherwise you haven't really grown strong on the inside. And that's hexagram 60. It says at some point you may also need to put regulations on regulations, which is a way of saying that there needs to be times where you can soften and then you can re-engage with the firmness of a boundary. At first, the boundary needs to be really firm, right? But then in time, like if you can't ever be flexible with a boundary, you haven't really tested or cultivated the thing that the boundary was supposed to be cultivating on the inside, the inner strength. That's Mars-Neptune. How do we feel powerful and fluid, intuitive, improvisational with the use of our will? For most of us, that doesn't come without a tremendous amount of work and effort and boundaries. At some point, if you don't learn how to, if the boundaries can't be softened and you can't then learn how to put them up, and make them harder and then soften them and make them a little bit more porous, you're not really learning strength. That's the point. So we all know this. This is like super intuitive. I don't think I'm saying anything that's like mind blowing, but isn't it interesting that for the soul, for the evolving soul, this is like a really difficult recurring lesson. So many times we have to learn how to be disciplined, but not so disciplined that that the discipline becomes more important than the thing the discipline is actually trying to cultivate. Now, again, you could go in the opposite direction, and sometimes people do, which is where they think that they can be all powerful and there's no need for discipline, and that's a kind of rebellious Mars-Neptune complex as well. But I see the opposite problem, which is that we don't know how to work with boundaries, structures, limits, disciplines, without it being too restrictive and without emphasizing the restriction more than the thing the restriction is trying to help us develop. Okay, anyway, as the soul goes from lifetime to lifetime, aren't we trying to learn to walk by spirit rather than the letter of the law? I mean, when I think of the Christian tradition, whether you like it or not, and whether you take it literally or not, right? There's a great teaching that Jesus emphasizes over and over in the Gospels, which is that there's the law, right? There's like the letter of the law, and then there's the spirit of the law. And the two walk hand in hand. Those people who want to destroy the letter of the law because they feel like it's restrictive, there's usually something impatient and immature about that. But on the other hand, people who can only live by the letter of the law are suffocating others and themselves spiritually. So, how do you live by the spirit of the law? There's a dance that happens between the structures and the rules and the need to also like know when to use them and know when to soften them. Okay, number two is called on my list is hexagram 61, which is called inner truth, and it follows on hexagram 60. And I would talk about this as inner authority. So with Mars Neptune, it's a very similar idea, right? Inner strength, feeling strong, feeling capable, feeling like you can perform and do things at a high level, but also very fluidly. And the dance between that inner strength and structure and discipline. Inner authority is interesting because to whatever extent, like, and let me back up and just say this. Hexagram 61 says something like this. Sometimes it's called faithfulness in the center. Sometimes it's called conforming. Sometimes it's called inward confidence. And sometimes it's called central sincerity, 61. Okay, so let's just say that it's very similar when it comes to learning how to feel the divine presence and learning how to align yourself with something like the Tao or something like the divine will, whatever we want to call it, the creative force of the universe. Different ways of conceptualizing it. And there's no way that you can align yourself with that energy unless you have recognized it as a creative force that is bigger than yourself. It doesn't mean better than yourself. And that is the place where most people struggle, is that to develop a felt sense of trust and inner security while surrendering yourself to an intelligence, a will, and a way bigger than yourself is really hard. Because one of the things that it does to us immediately is it brings up the idea of authority, someone that has authority over us, right? Or someone or something that might be greater than us or better than us, and we're subject to its will or something like that. That's really challenging, especially if you've had any encounters with authority figures who have abandoned, disappointed, or directly harmed. If you have had a father or mother that have harmed you, if you've had a religious authority figure that's harmed you, a school authority figure that's harmed you, anything where your trust was to be placed in someone who was guiding you, and they were guiding you maybe by means of a variety of different a variety of different what am I trying to say? Like features that allowed them to have that authority. Like, okay, my professor has a PhD, or my dad is a parent, or there's something that in life tells us, okay, this person in the post that they hold has they have the qualities, or they have the experience or the background that should allow me to inherently just place my trust in them, my faith in them. And then my will is being surrendered to their guidance or their example or something like that. And if you've ever been in that situation and it's been messed up, it then a lot of the times what happens is we become self-reliant to a fault. It's like it becomes hard to trust again. But there's this interesting thing with Mars Neptune always, where it's like the ability that you have to develop and cultivate the strength of your own will is almost entirely dependent upon uh, finding and getting in contact with the greater creative forces of the universe, God, the Tao, and the examples of that force in people, in places and things, and actively in trust and faith, surrendering something of your will and your way to its way. We tend to make the same exact mistake, which is like, well, if I have to surrender everything and then I dissolve my individuality. And because we sense that it's true that there is something greater than me and I need to trust in faith and, surrender, and there will be something that will carry me. It's like we sense that there are currents of water flowing beneath us and we're on an inner tube drifting down a river, we can feel that. And so we know that we're supposed to learn how to, surrender something of our nature and our will to the divine way and will. And I see this all the time. I imagine most of you have that kind of faith on some level, that there's something bigger going on and that it's trustworthy and that it's difficult and a little bit scary, but that we should learn to. But along the way, what happens is we do the same thing we were talking about with strength, where it's like, oh, I'm going to surrender myself so fully that I lose my agency or my autonomy. And then I end up in a religious or spiritual community that's somewhat fanatical, or I end up with a guru or teacher that maybe I learned some good things from, but end up having to extricate myself from the relationship and retain something of my own individual nature because I just went too far. I surrendered too much, the opposite could be true as well, where someone with Mars-Neptune is like, oh, I'm playing this by ear. I don't need any training. I don't need any musical scales to play. I don't need anything because my own will is sovereign. And there's a kind of God complex that comes with Mars-Neptune, where we think, well, and unless you explain to me exactly why I ought to do what I ought to do in every single case, and unless I perfectly understand everything, I'm not going to do anything that anybody tells me. I'm not going to have any examples that I follow by faith. Because to me, I'm sovereign, right? And so there's this it's tricky though. I mean, because can you blame someone for not wanting to completely lose themselves and drink the Kool-Aid and lose their own will, their own identity, their own sort of sovereignty? At the same time, there's no way to cultivate that sovereignty without also trusting in forces and powers that are bigger than us, that are not better than us, but that are stronger than us, or that are, so there's a collective. Whether that's I have to trust in a group, or I have to be part of a group or part of a tradition, or I have to trust teachers, or I have to take some things on faith that I can't perfectly understand. There's no way to cultivate that sense of inner knowing in life without having surrendered our knowing and trusting in things, people, processes, powers other or greater than ourselves. Right? So that's the other thing with Mars-Neptune that's really hard, but the soul has to learn that. Otherwise, it never gets to really experience what it's like to be a co-creative part of God. It's like, for us to realize, oh, actually, I'm endowed with the same creative nature as God, and I'm not better or worse than God, but I'm also not all of God, right? I'm just a little part. To take up that there's actually an infinite amount of dignity and power in recognizing exactly who we are and being okay with it not being more or less than anyone or anything else, including the totality of everything. Right? And it's like there's no way to get there to feeling like we're co-creative, meaningful beings with a good amount of participatory power unless we do not feign to be the experts in every situation. We're humble. We have to at times surrender ourselves to the knowledge and advice of other people, or we have to develop practices of listening and aligning ourselves with, the Tao in like each situation. Oh gosh, I don't know exactly what to do in this situation. I'm not going to pretend like my ideas, thoughts, opinions, judgments are all perfect. I stand to learn a lot, and we have that attitude. It doesn't mean you're weak. So one of the things that's so interesting about hexagram 61 is it talks a lot about, the kind of inner confidence that you have to have inner knowing, to know something, to trust something, to work with something. Doesn't mean that you are all powerful or omnipotent or omniscient. It means that there's a confidence to take a step in a direction, even if you don't know what's going to happen, that there's a listening and there's a trusting and there's an ability to surrender the need to be all powerful and to know where everything is heading. And the more that we trust that ability while also learning to exercise our own creative willpower, that is the only point at which we actually become influential. So hexagram 61 has a lot to do with the humble means by which we develop an inner sense of knowing and power such that we have any influence in the flow of the Tao, you know, any felt influence at any rate. I think that's fascinating because I would say, like, again, one of the hardest things we have to deal with is we think to ourselves, unless I understand exactly, I'm not going to do something unless I understand it. Well, the opposite is I'm going to do something so that I can understand, right? Or, you know, again, I'm going to stop laboring this now, but just the idea that if you've been wounded by, you know, being disappointed in authorities or faith traditions or whatever, it can be really hard to develop this ability to listen and trust. But the mantra of hexagram 61 is that I can be influenced by even the lowliest of creatures. Like if I spend time watching a fish or a pig, two animals referenced in this hexagram, I can actually find out that they are very intelligent, that there's things they know that can inform me and enlighten me. And so there's a sense in which we move from being in the position of the knower and the person with all of the knowledge and power to the person who really doesn't know anything, and yet from that space comes all of this strength. The evidence of that is usually in our lives. Do we have places where we really deeply listen as opposed to always exerting what we think we know? You need practices of listening for all of these qualities. Anyway, the final one is not my will but thine, which just means in general, Mars-Neptune has to do with this evolutionary lesson that we're all learning, which is that the more that we surrender to the divine will, the more the divine will empowers us with understanding and participatory power. And there's so many different ways to surrender. And we have to imagine ways in which the surrender of our will does not look like some kind of self-sabotaging, weak sauce, you know? Surrender in an intentional manner, the deliberate laying down of our sword itself is it's a strong action. And we have to be able to imagine that strength can come through different kinds of actions and that surrender is one of the strongest. So anyway, okay, ramblings today philosophically. I hope they were useful and they give you some ways of thinking about and relating to the upcoming Mars-Neptune dynamic. Stick around after I sign off. I'm going to tell you about the first year program coming up in June. I'd love for you guys to come study astrology at Nightlight this summer. It's a great time to start with Jupiter and Uranus just conjoining. So I hope to see you there. Stick around to learn more about it. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye. Hey, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our upcoming program, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic, my year one course in ancient Hellenistic astrology that begins on June 16th. If you'd like to learn more about it, of course, you can always do some digging and looking at the course page on your own. I'll take you over there right now and walk you through it. But if you want to, you can go over yourself and look. Nightlightastrology.com is the website. Click on the courses tab and go to the first year course. This is the one that begins on June 16th, the perfect place to start for people who would like to learn more about natal astrology from the Hellenistic point of view. So this is a one-year course in Hellenistic astrology, which is the oldest form of astrology, and it is the form from which all subsequent forms of astrology come from. It shares a lot in its roots with ancient Indian astrology. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what characterizes Hellenistic astrology, but just to familiarize you with this page, when you go to the first year course page and scroll down, you can learn more about everything that's included in the course. Some of the main features include 30 classes on the year. These classes are spread out through units of curriculum. And in between the major units of curriculum, we have breakout study sessions led by our tutoring staff. We also have an interactive group forum discussion that is staffed with tutors year round. You always get your questions answered within 24 hours. So there's a lot of support built into the program as we work our way through the curriculum. We also have recommended reading, listening, optional quizzes, flashcards, bonus lectures, more than you could possibly read in a year, honestly. So we just have a large and long biography and sort of library of suggested bonus content that will fill in blanks and also supplement and deepen the material that we are studying. You get lifetime access to all the recordings. If you cannot attend the webinars live, they meet on the weekends. But if you can't attend them live, then you are welcome to follow along with the recordings, which are made available to you on the class website. So this class meets on Sundays from noon Central to 2 p.m. Central, or 1 Eastern to 3 p.m. Eastern time. And you might translate that, I guess, if you're on the West Coast, it would be 10 a.m. to noon Pacific time. During the program, in addition to working our way through all of the major curriculum, the major foundational elements of Hellenistic astrology, we place a strong emphasis on preparing ourselves to read charts for other people. Whether this is a hobby for you or something that you are endeavoring to practice professionally, the course is built for people who are really there for a lot of different reasons. This is your hobby. This is your passion. You hope to do this for really no one other than yourself, or maybe friends or family, or someone who really decides they want to start a practice. You can take this class at whatever level of interest or depth that you want because of the amount of material that we make available to you inside and outside of class. You always have access to the program too, so you can always take it at your own pace. You can attend live, follow along with the recordings, some combination of both. And then the breakout study sessions are really helpful in addition to our interactive group forum discussion. You can always ask us questions. You can email me anytime with questions. So we have a lot of support in place. Now, the curriculum, we move through the foundational elements of ancient astrology. You may look at the curriculum and say, well, I know something about these things already, but not really, not unless you've studied Hellenistic astrology, because the way that ancient astrologers talked about houses, signs, planets, aspects, essential dignities, chart delineation is radically different from what most people learn when they start studying modern astrology. The reason for that is that it's only been in the past couple of decades that we have finally had access to the vast majority of ancient texts on Hellenistic astrology. We were literally missing the bulk of our ancient tradition. So the kind of rebirth or reawakening of ancient astrology is really new, which makes this very exciting because everything you've learned in modern astrology is probably coming from the lens of what is called psychological astrology, which is a way of looking at the birth chart in terms of the planet, signs, houses, and the way in which they may relate to your psychological makeup or profile. In this way, birth charts are a little bit like an elaborate Myers-Briggs. So you have the personality profiling, which is the way that most people look at planets, houses, and signs. You'll notice my Mars, my Venus, and they think of them as aspects or dimensions of your character and personality. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we utilize much of the same language, and we certainly have that approach available to us in this program because ancient astrologers also looked at the chart in terms of psychological makeup. However, one of the main distinctions between modern astrology and ancient astrology is the emphasis that ancient astrologers placed on prediction. They looked at the chart in terms of a field of karma that defines the native or the individual's fate or destiny. And so we look at houses, signs, planets, aspects as a way of understanding what patterns, themes, and topics are going to be most prevalent and at what times, because they also had a very elaborate system of timing techniques. The year one program is all about learning to read the birth chart and understanding the ancient Hermetic sort of Platonic Pythagorean philosophy that was behind the establishment of all of the doctrines and teachings of astrology itself. So it's really about understanding where everything comes from. It's the why behind everything that greatly empowers people when they're learning astrology. It is not nearly the same when you just study lists of adjectives and descriptions for houses, signs, planets, aspects. We want to understand why. Why do we do these things at all? Where did it all come from? And when you understand that, then you have something like a skeleton key by means of which you can access your own creativity, your own intuition, rather than being told, just play these notes in this order and it will sound good. You're learning to improvise. Which, could anyone ever want to play? Why would you want to play an instrument if someone told you, well, here's how to play it. Play this, play that. And you never learned how to play something of your own, or you never learned how to use the scales in ways that were magical and, pertain to your own genie, your own genius. So when we study ancient astrology, one of the main things we're doing is we're taking people beyond anything that they think they've learned about houses, signs, planets, aspects, and we're teaching them where it all came from. And once you have that, then you're really cooking with fire. You have a magical, intuitive capacity that is very rare and precious in astrology. So anyway, we move through a lot of different elements, but not in the way that you've ever learned them before, and that's a really important distinction. So anyway, after all of that has been said, in each unit we spend maybe up to 10 hours on houses. And then we have a breakout study session, and then we have reading and bonus material. So when we talk about houses in this class, you are learning where the concept of a house ever came from in the first place, what it is, how it works, and how it's different from a sign. You're also going to unlearn and break a lot of bad habits, because not by any intentional ignorance, but modern astrology, being bereft of its ancient textual tradition, has been teaching a lot of things that are just not in line with where the actual theoretical foundations of astrology come from. So you're also going to break some bad habits, which is really good for people who maybe know a little bit about astrology already, but are seeking to clarify and understand theory in the context of the 2,000-year history of astrology. So anyway, this class is going to prepare you to read birth charts for other people. But then by the end, one of the great things about the program is that the way we do that is not just by pumping you full of theory and history and philosophy. We are also, in the last portion of the program, inviting live clients into the class. And that's great, because when we have live clients come in, you're going to see me read from them using the theory and techniques that we've been studying. And you're going to see how they can be applied artfully, as well as, giving you some tools and methods and techniques to use to set you up for success. Seeing live astrology practice while studying it is the best way to learn. So the last portion of the program, we turn toward that hands-on approach. Anyway, so that's a bit about the program. If you have any questions you want to ask, email us, info@nightlightastrology.com. We're happy to answer any questions you have whatsoever. I also want to point people to the payment options at the bottom. Early bird payment saves you $500 off. That is a great way to save. The payment plan is breaking the tuition into 12 monthly installments. If that works better for you, no worries, you can do that. And then need-based tuition. We, for many, many years now, dating back to 2010 when I started teaching astrology, I've always had some kind of sliding scale option available for people when studying astrology. Sacred science like this should be accessible to people of all different socioeconomic backgrounds. So we pride ourselves on making sure that there is tuition assistance available, so that if your budget doesn't match with the payment price that we ask for, and that's an honest assessment that we trust you to make, that you can take advantage of the tuition assistance and set your price within a sliding scale that we provide for your monthly tuition for 12 months through the program. So please feel free to apply for that if it makes sense to you. We don't want people hurting themselves or overextending themselves. A price that fits your budget is available through the need-based tuition. We just ask that you apply early, because we do fill up sometimes. So anyway, that is it. I hope that you will consider studying with us, and thanks for taking time to learn more about the program. See you later.